This is Writers Not Writing, the show where you can get to know your favorite writers and soon-to-be favorite writers by listening to them confess to the ways they procrastinate. Thanks for procrastinating with us. I'm Benjamin Gorman, and the quiet guy behind the glass there is Doug the producer. I write novels and collections of poetry and stuff. Doug tries his best to make me sound better. And each week we have a secret word to listen for. If you catch it, you earn the right to take an extra break at the time of your choosing from whatever is stressing you out. From Not a Pipe Publishing, welcome to Writers Not Writing.
Today's secret word is Hulk Hogan.
Welcome, everyone. Today's guest is Frances Lu-Pai Ippolito, a Chinese-American writer in Portland, Oregon. When she's not spending time with her family outdoors, she's crafting short stories in horror, science fiction, fantasy, or whatever genre bending she can get away with. Her writing has appeared in several venues, including the Buckman Journal, Strange House's Chromophobia, Not a Pipe Publishing's own anthology, Stories Within, Mother, Tales of Love and Terror, Death's Garden Revisited, and Unquiet Spirits, Essays by Asian American Women in Horror. Frances also co-chairs the Young Willamette Writers Program that provides free writing classes for high school and middle school students. Frances, thank you for being here today.
Thank you for having me. It's such a pleasure to be here.
Well, this is a fun show where we don't get into process. We're just talking about procrastination. And the first thing we always have to do, the folks who are watching on YouTube can see us right now. They can see our costumes. We come in these full costumes every time. We really are going all out for the show. And so we describe our costumes for the folks who are just listening on the podcast. So tell everybody about what you're wearing.
Well, I was thinking that spring is coming, and so I wanted to dress appropriate to the season. And I think the best way to describe my outfit is cabbage, or what I like to call future kimchi, because that is what cabbage is destined to become often in my house. So what I've got on is a white shirt with leafy green trim and dark leggings, just like soil. And when I write or don't write, I really like to be in tune with all the senses, including my appetite, because I like to cook. And so right now I'm thinking about spring and pickled vegetables.
And I wanted to match, and so I wore something that matches kind of my ancestry. So I went out and got this Mr. Potato Head costume, because that's, how my ancestors survived, was, they're the poorest people of Ireland and Eastern Europe. And so lots and lots of potatoes. And so I just rented this Mr. Potato Head costume. And so I think that'll be a fun show. We've got kimchi and potatoes here today.
I'm hungry already.
I know. I know. I'm like, I really should have brought something. So what has been, when you're not writing this last week, what has been your favorite kind of pop culture distraction?
Yeah, which is really hard because, there's so much content out there to figure out which ones to be obsessed about for that day. One thing that I really liked is this Korean reality show that's on Netflix. It's called Physical 100. And basically, they bring in all of these participants who are athletes in different ways, cheerleaders, gymnasts, Olympic gold medal winners, or bodybuilders, wrestlers, women and men. And they put them in these physical challenges where, the different strengths of their particular physique may be a weakness or an advantage. And so I love watching it. And I kind of love the women wrestlers. They're just so amazing, like physically. They just toss people around.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
I'm a big basketball fan. And one of the things I love about basketball is that it is the complexity of the sport is such that you can't really have doping in the same way that you could, because if you get too bulked up and you're really, really strong, that becomes a disadvantage in your speed. If you are using something that increases your stamina, but it is, getting in the way of your judgment, that's going to impair you as well. And so, I would love to check out something where you're recognizing that training for one particular event doesn't necessarily prepare you for all of them.
Yeah, and the challenges are kind of secret. And so when these contestants are presented with them, it's interesting to see their reactions, because some of them come in very confident and they're not anymore after they see what they have to do. Something else that I've been doing is I play a lot of board games, and and in general. And one of them that I really like is by Awaken Realms, and it's Etherfields, and it's an older game, but it's got really great art. It's sort of an immersive experience where you go into a dream, and in the dream you're encountering this world that's slowly being revealed, and then monsters will come out. You can awaken from dreams if you make yourself awaken, but you also can get stuck in dreams and doing them over and over again if you're not successful. So I think that was kind of an interesting experience.
And is it more tabletop or cards or both? How does
it's both. So it's tabletop. There's a lot of board components that you have to build out, but there are cards that you use as well. And let's see what else. And it just has a lot of pieces too, like the monsters and like your character. So I like games that have that real tactile experience, but I also really love games that have great storytelling. And this is one I think that does a pretty good job balancing. I mean, every game has their little like things where I'm like, oh, I would have done that, like every book, right? We're like, oh, I would have done that a little differently. But I do like this one. I like a lot of the things that Awaken Realms has put out. They put out Nemesis, and which is sort of I won't call it aliens, but it is aliens. It's a little bit like aliens, where you're on a ship and there are these creatures that are coming to hunt you.
Are these role-playing games where what would be the length of time that you could continue playing one character?
Well, these are campaigns. And so that's what I love about games like this, or legacy games, is that it's not each time you just start over. I mean, you could, but each iteration builds on itself, and so you kind of uncover a little bit more of the puzzle. So I've played Pandemic in the past. I don't know if you play Pandemic, which is like a little bit probably too much to play these days, but I played that one through, and they have a couple legacy games as well where you're trying to solve this mystery of how this particular thing came out into the world, and then you have to work with your team, and then as you progress you realize that some things are a little more sinister or something. And then this one, you have a story that's slowly being revealed, and you're making choices, but ultimately the story will unfold. And each time you play, it takes you closer to kind of just exploring the world, but also like what the next step is. In Nemesis there is that as well, but you can also play it as a standalone. This is just like a group of us playing together. We're going to play one episode. We don't have to, you don't have to play each time with the same group of people.
That's which is nice, because role-playing games, getting the group together can be one of the big challenges. What is the length of time most of the time for a single episode?
For this one, for a 2-player, I would say, I don't know, it's not really long. I think it's like 45. That's been my experience. Sometimes it can go an hour. And I mean, if you're...
It's still very manageable. And then you could decide, we could do another one. We could, we're here.
Or you can choose like stopping points, like, oh, we weren't successcal. Maybe we should take a break. And like with Nemesis, it can be a little bit longer because it's I think it's a little bit harder in the sense that there's a bigger board, and you kind of you have like missions. So it could take longer with more people. But I don't know. I do like the games that are short, but sometimes you have like there's like a sweet spot of like 90 minutes, I think 90 minutes to 2 hours, right? So
although an hour is nice because you could easily decide in the moment, let's do 2, and so that provides that flexibility.
I kind of feel like you've been distracted by games lately too.
Oh yes, yeah. And so this is one where I'm like, this sounds really up my alley. And I like the idea of playing in that dreamy reality, that dreamy space. So that could be really cool.
Yeah, the art is really pretty. What else have I been distracted by? I think everybody's distracted by AI. So just put me down on the list of like what is going to happen. I don't know. I mean, I have no idea.
Yeah, well, and you work in this field, so what is the part of it that is the copywritten work of the human? I was hearing a new term that's cracked me up. They are calling this potential profession prompt engineers, which I think is a terrible term, because prompt could also be an adjective. Are they fast engineers? But the people who get really good at telling the AI, this is what we'd like you to do, and so this potential whole field of people who are good at working with AI. But do they own it then? Who owns that?
Yeah, it's very interesting. I mean, I mean, I won't get too much into it because I do work at like in the legal side of a lot of, well, I mean, I don't actually do like any private practice work anymore. I work for the government, but it is interesting to see how the law is developing to try to keep up with,
Mhm.
because I will say this in the most diplomatic way. Law is very conservative and
Yes,
slow.
it's slow.
So it is not, when I think of like innovative and fast, it is not usually what I think of. I think of like, startups and stuff. I don't necessarily think like, yay, like we're going to move really quickly with changes. So it's interesting to me to see how quickly the AI is developing,
Yeah,
and that there will be a lag to see how to deal with even things like where, a particular artist or an illustrator is an artist, is creating art, but is then melding it with other
right,
components that may not be solely like by hand or self-generated,
yeah,
to see what that means and how that's going to be treated. And I think also it'll be interesting to me to see when somebody completely independent from the first artist puts in the same prompt, right? Get
right.
something similar, because the AI is learning from everybody, and the
Right.
AI
Well,
is
and
not,
there have
you
been
know,
legal tests in the past that have used percentages. If it is
mhm.
10% new work, if it is, well, how would you measure that with AI? The human creates the prompt. Is that 90% the AI's work? Is that 50% the AI's work? So that will be really interesting to see. And the AI learn from other humans. So
Yep.
do those people deserve to have a cut? If realistically, that's everyone. I mean, everyone who's creating anything online is teaching the AI. Do those people all deserve some compensation for the thing that ended up being created because they participated in the education of the AI? So
Well, yeah, and on the publishing side too, I'm sure that there are there's different temperatures, right, for how people feel about having work that might have been inspired or generated or assisted by AI in any way, right? And some people might think, well, I don't want anything that has at all touched, like even a prompt, right? And other people are like, well, I don't know, like
yeah.
you
Well,
made it,
we
so
started to see this very new phenomena of, with for next to nothing, you can generate an auto response kind of query letter and
mhm.
attach a story that's computer generated, and you can make submissions. And so I'll
Yeah.
get these submissions where the email is barely written by a human, and the short story they're sending into me, or the novel in some cases, are not written by a human at all. And it's
Yeah.
getting to the point where I'm thinking about saying, for our submissions page, you have to pay $1 or something like that,
Mhm.
just to create some kind of barrier to
Barrier,
entry, so that
yeah.
when all these folks say, hey, it's free to submit, I might as well submit to all of them, and maybe somebody will accidentally pick up my AI generated novel that took me no effort. So that's something that we've been talking about, Vivica and I, like, do we want to 50 cents, like, but just it's
Yeah.
something that prevents the computers from submitting. So we shall see how that's going to play out.
Mm.
I do have one hope, because like you, I am concerned that the legal system is too slow to deal with this. Like, this is going to, there was a senator who was still describing the internet as a system of tubes in like the aughts. Like, he just had no idea how it functioned. And so that, yeah, by the time the senators who can't program their own microwaves are trying to decide how to, create complex copyright law, it will have moved beyond them. But my hope is that we can use AI to monitor AI, that we can
Mhm.
have programs where I could say, I want to use the filter on my browser that identifies AI generated content, so that it dissuades people from using AI, because they're going, some measure of people out there will immediately see that this is AI. Let's not use that as the picture in our AI generated clickbait article. Let's not use AI generated text in that article, because some people right away won't read it. And so, just letting people know this is not created by a human, I think will allow us to make intelligent decisions about, yeah, but maybe it's really great. I might want that AI generated song, but at least I'm aware that it's AI generated because a different program told me that. So
Yeah, I
that's
think
my
it,
hope.
yeah, and I know that like it takes a while for like other industries or other parts of society to catch up. But I feel like it's also kind of exciting and fascinating to see
Yeah.
what will happen. I know it's like hard. In some ways, it's like traumatic for artists. It's like, what? Like, I work so hard. I mean, I don't think that the AI is going to replace everything, but I think you're right. I think there is going to be some sort of complementary relationship that is going to have to evolve because that's kind of where we are. You know, it's not going away. Can't put it back in the box.
Well,
So
and you think
let's
about
see what
like our
happens.
kids have grown up, I'm old enough that I'm that in between generation where, like I started using email in college. So I did have a time pre-internet in my life, and my students cannot fathom a world without internet. Like that is, their phones have always been available their entire lives. And the next generation will not have lived in a time without AI. Like that will be their experience. And so we are developing these technologies, and it divides the generations. So that'll
Yeah,
be
it
interesting to see
does.
how they might be far more comfortable with it than we are.
Yeah, I think so. I feel that there's a lot more comfort in, and this isn't like an age thing. I think younger people tend to be a little bit more comfortable about a lot of things, but
Yeah.
I think just in general of sharing themselves,
Hmm.
very publicly, and so sharing yourself to an AI or giving an AI more information for assistance might not really be that different than just whatever they're doing already. It's going into the
Yeah. It's well, and
yeah.
reminds me of the fact that I learned once, I can't remember what the year was, but there were no real clear pieces of legislation that guaranteed any kind of right to privacy before, I believe it was in the 1900s, because it just wasn't a concern. Like people didn't worry if they were living, 5 miles away from the nearest person, that their privacy was being invaded, that needed to be protected at all. And so we have this sense of, oh, you can't take from me, that was never enshrined in law. There's no privacy right explicitly in the Constitution. It's in some, interpretation since, but because that wasn't a concern, and we may just have this weird moment in our history where, for a period of time, people worried about privacy, and then in the future they just go, no, that's not even a concern. Everything is public. I think this next generation may go, no, everybody knows everything about everybody, and that's fine.
Yeah. I mean,
They
that's a
might be
lot
more
of
comfortable with it.
trust. That's a lot of
Yeah,
trust to put into, the whatever is receiving all the information.
right,
But I don't know, like grumpy cat pictures are probably low risk. So
right.
there's it's,
Well, and it will,
it depends on what you're putting
is
out there.
the lack of privacy actually going to be the solution, the transparency? So instead of Google owns this information about me, maybe it's just out there and everybody owns it. And that way, when my insurance company finds out something and uses it to jack up my rates, it's like, yeah, because it was public information, because everything is basically public. And the next generation may be comfortable with that. Whereas I'm going, oh, I don't like the idea of turning over my DNA to ancestry.com, because what if they turn it over to my insurance company? And so
Yeah.
yeah, this next group may have a very different attitude about that. And it's interesting to think about the fact that these values can just change over time based on the technology.
Yeah, and I've actually thought about it because I have kids and I thought, oh, yeah, I grew up and I went to college and I met some kids who didn't have TVs in their homes. And so
Right.
I was one of those kids that grew up on like Smurfs and like things I
Uh-huh,
watched a
exactly.
lot. I watched a lot of cartoons. And I think I came out okay, but I did watch, like I could
Oh
sing
yeah.
these songs, right? These show songs. And I met some kids who didn't have TVs at home. They were way more productive people, but they also gave off that kind of vibe of like, like
Yeah.
I'm not sure if I can explain this to you. So I think sometimes about my kids, this concept of like if they're not out there, if they don't have a presence or their data isn't out there, is that going to be weird when someone tries to
Yeah.
Google and they find like it's been scrubbed? like, what are you hiding?
Right?
Like,
Yeah, they're
what
going to be
did you?
socially separated,
Yeah.
in an effort to protect our kids. Are we socially distancing them from the very people who are going to say, but this is normal? Yeah, I had some friends in college who were the same way. They never had TV as a kid, and they, we would be sitting around and somebody would make a reference to G.I. Joe or Transformers or whatever, and they were going, I don't know this thing that you're talking about. And we're like, how can a human not know this? Everyone knows this, but you're right. If you're not exposed, it can make you odd, even though the thing wasn't particularly of value. If you
Yeah.
go back and watch those old Transformers cartoons, they're terrible. We're not watching good stuff.
Although I'm pretty sure that if someone gave you a transformer, like one of those,
Oh,
you would totally be
I would
like,
be totally excited, but you go back and you watch them, and the Transformers was the first one that was really brilliant, where they realized, hey, instead of advertising to kids on some other show, we can make money by having a 20-minute long advertisement with advertisements in it.
yeah.
And so the show is awful. It is so bad. The animation is terrible. They had no interest in producing something of quality. It was just, kids are dumb, they'll watch this thing. And so like the disdain for the audience comes through. They're like, this barely makes sense. Robots, we just want you to buy the robots. Oh, we don't have a
Buy the
piece for you to
toys.
buy with that, then we'll just excise it from the story. Like, it was all about, hey, we're advertising a new thing for you to buy on this episode. Like, it's
I
really
feel like a
bad.
lot of the cartoons of that time, like He-Man and all
Yeah.
those, like, were designed. There were a lot of toys. I can remember the commercials for the. Now that you meant, maybe my friends who didn't have TVs had it right. Like,
Yeah, they
maybe
were just advertisements, and so
there were
each
so many
episode was like, we're
advertisements.
introducing a new character for you to purchase.
Yeah.
And, oh, the other stuff that makes a story valuable, if there's nothing to purchase that relates to it, we're going to minimize that. And so the storytelling is really abominable. And then you realize, because the whole driver is, we need to introduce this new character for you to buy. Like, it's a weird way to tell a story when you're only focused on your product line, because that's all the boss cares about is this going to translate into sales of toys? They're
But
very odd.
I have to tell you that right now I really want a toy after we
Right,
talked
right.
about this.
Yes. Yes. I mean, and so I like look back on those and I'm like, oh, those toys were so important to us,
Yeah, they were.
But
with going to McDonald's and getting that Happy Meal with that toy inside. Oh my, I still get excited when I go through drive-through.
we had the weirdest experience. We were in Greece, or maybe we were in Italy this last summer, and my son and a couple of friends walked into a McDonald's, and they were promoting this new Minions movie, and the Happy Meal toy was a full-size beach towel that was an advertisement for Minions. And they were like,
wow,
we're on vacation, we didn't bring beach towels, everybody get a Happy Meal. So we had Minions beach towels that came in the Happy Meal. Like, very different idea of what kind of thing.
wow.
Whereas there's this woman, I don't know if you've ever heard her story. She's called I believe it's the Junk Queen. She's brilliant, and she figured out that a Chinese entrepreneur, she figured out that she could kind of corner the market of producing plastic junk in China that would then be put in Happy Meals, knowing full well it would almost immediately be thrown away, and that the Chinese government would subsidize the shipping of the Chinese junk to the United States. The American government would pay her to own the landfills where it would be dumped in China. And so she was making money both ways on stuff that was just garbage. And she's a billionaire. Isn't that
Wow.
wild? Like, this is totally useless. I mean, from an environmental perspective, it's a nightmare. Like, this is just unnecessary oil going back and forth across the Pacific Ocean. But if both governments are participating, she just sat back and went, I make junk, the Americans throw it away, they pay me to throw it away here. That was her whole business.
Did you ever watch that movie Labyrinth with
Yes.
that character, the lady?
Yes, yes, the Junk Queen.
Yes.
I got that for you right here. Yep.
Yeah, that's exactly what I'm thinking about. Like,
oh yeah,
I got that for you. Don't go anywhere.
That scene scared me when I was a kid.
Yeah.
I was like, she's terrifying. Yeah, but
Muppets are terrifying, actually, I think. But
yeah, hoarders can be very frightening. So what's a news story that's been taking your attention away this last week from your writing?
Yeah, well, let's see, last week, I don't know if it was last week, but it's been this month. So speaking of like social media and the internet. I was reading about this 85-year-old Harvard study that I think basically tells us what we probably should already know, which is that if you have a lot of toxic relationships in your life, you're gonna die early. So, I mean, it was bigger than that. It was more of like, what is actually happiness, and how is that um, for longevity? And the study found over time that it's not really tied to money. I mean, certainly like, better healthcare, but it's not really tied to wealth or even diet or even really like health. It's more tied to having positive relationships. And that means that those relationships are in sort of a like varied relationships. And so what the study is sort of like supporting is this idea that you should have social fitness. You should do an audit of your relationships and like really go through and check to see they don't have to all be like 100% great, like from nose to tail, but everybody
Yeah.
knows that there are certain relationships that have not been positive for periods of time, and to go through and just to see if you got a good balance, because if you don't, then yeah, you're probably actually giving up years of your life to some
Years
of
of your
these
life.
people, like they
Yeah, no,
actually
I've
are.
read about this. This study's fascinating. It's flawed in that almost all the participants at the beginning were, cishet white males. And so it is a different, it is a population that is limited. So some of the conclusions should be taken with a grain of salt, but they found really fascinating stuff with that. But, yes, absolutely. Years of your life can be lost. One of the things that was a interesting finding in that is children don't make you happy. Grandchildren do. Being a parent of young kids, your happiness goes down for a while. And then as your children become adults, and then especially if they have children, then your happiness goes up.
It's a long-term
Yes.
investment. It's a
Yep.
long-term
It really
investment. Yeah.
is. So I thought that was great.
Yeah. Sorry,
I,
kids. All of your kids.
well, I think I did it right because I've got one child. He's phenomenal. I'm very happy with my one kid, but I've been pressuring him his entire life to have lots of children of his own. So I'll get to have like 5 grandkids, but I just had to raise one. I think I'm doing the math properly there.
I see. You've talked to him
Oh
about
yeah,
this.
yeah. He
Okay.
he just rolls his eyes and ignores me, but I'm still laying the groundwork. So
Yes.
start laying the groundwork with your kids now that they are
Yeah.
obligated to have far more children than you did,
Yeah. So
for your
it's
sake.
so instead of like those cartoons we watch, you should build in like the ads for
Like,
grant.
yeah, child rearing videos. Yes, exactly. Yeah, I mean, even when we was little, we were like, hey, I don't care what your sexual orientation is, as long as you're really comfortable with adopting, but you need to have lots of kids for my sake, because I love babies, but I want to raise one and take care of lots of yours. So yeah, I've been working on them.
I like this. I feel like you've pinpointed the way to get your life force
Yep.
back.
Yep, that's the long-term planning. I want to be a grandfather to lots and lots of little adorable babies. That's the key to happiness. So, what's a hobby you've been working on that pulls you away from your writing?
So I do a lot of running. I don't I'm a terrible runner in the winter, because I don't I know a lot of people in the Pacific Northwest are like, it's just water. You just go out, you put on the appropriate attire. You don't need to stop in the rain. But
It's
rain
cold.
destroys my shoes. It destroys my feet. And so I do run though. So I run a lot indoors. And I in the summer I will run outside and I will play ultimate frisbee when I can. There are a lot of pickup games actually in Portland.
That sounds, I love Ultimate and I do not play it enough. And it's a great workout. You run for, 4 hours.
Yeah.
And it's a blast.
Yeah, it's a lot of fun, and people are really nice usually, and it's like very orderly. Like you have a specific distance, you
Yeah.
stand, you're like, you have the disc. I'm just gonna stand here and count while
Hmm.
you hold it, give you some time, you think about what you want to do, but when the timer goes off, I'm taking that from you.
Right.
So and so I think it's a very like well planned out game, I would say, and it's great exercise. I do have friction gloves, so I could go play in the rain, but I don't.
Well,
So
there's a
I do
level of
run.
cold where once the water gets through all the layers, it's a bone cold. I do not like
Yeah.
that, that we go protest for BLM every week. And when it's a rainy one and you're standing out there with a sign for an hour, it is cold.
Yeah, it
And it's
is.
like,
And my excuse is also environmental. Like, you're gonna rip up all the dirt, you're gonna rip off the fields, right?
yeah,
Like, don't do that.
yeah,
No, you want to leave it all
yes,
nice. You're gonna destroy all the grass. So don't bring because the mud gets stuck in the cleats and
oh
everything,
yeah,
bring it back. So that's one. I am doing I decided that instead of doing a lot of repeat runs locally for races, so I usually motivate myself by doing like a half or something, that I would go with a group of moms, and we would go and leave behind our families. It sounds horrible. We're
no,
gonna take
that's
a little
good for
little
you.
break, and go to do our first international run. So we're gonna go to Germany and do a run. We'll stay together. We'll do the run because I personally think that walking or running a city is one of the best ways to
Yeah,
actually see the
oh yeah,
city, and then being part of a race where you're with all the people. There's that energy of about you're about to go 13 miles into the city, over bridges. That's kind of how I want to explore cities. So we're gonna go to
yeah.
Germany, and
What
our
city?
hope to Cologne.
Which I have
Eh,
never been to, so I'm
Yeah,
jealous. I have been to Germany, but only southern Germany, and there are a lot of. I've never been to Berlin before. There are a lot, and I've never been to Cologne, so that's one of the cities that I would love to go
yeah, it's
visit.
a beautiful city from what I haven't been there. It's a beautiful city from what I can tell, and it has this kind of marriage of a lot of Europe, but like old and new, and so
Yeah,
some of the old city is there, and so we'll be able to run through some of the parts that have been there for a very long time. So yeah, I'm excited. And then the hope is that the group can take turns every couple of years picking where each of us will go. And then that sort of takes the place of doing multiple races during the year. We'll just do one major one and then we'll train for it, but we'll basically save up for that
yeah,
one race and be motivated to do that. And so yeah, I think it'll be a lot of fun. So I've been sort of running. I don't know. I'm trying to think about it. It's in October. And I guess the other thing that I do is I do read a lot of poetry and nonfiction, even though I write everything. And I've been reading Nikita Gill, Roske, Ocean Vaughn. So it's maybe it's the weather. You were saying like
right.
maybe poetry is kind of like seasonal too. Maybe right now it's kind of
It's
poetry
it's
weather.
poetry weather. It is, yeah. Here in Oregon, it is. This is the long part of the rainy season, and so yeah, I think that's a great idea. This is a good time to read poetry. For me,
Hmm.
the writing of poetry is often in that time in the summer when it's not too miserable to be out yet, not August, but when we have these beautiful days in kind of early summer that are 70 degrees, and I can just sit out on the back porch, and then I'm like, I'm feeling unproductive. I guess I'll write a couple of poems today, and I'll find like I write a lot
That's how
during
you're
that season.
unproductive,
Yeah,
man.
that's my well, I have this really bad habit of feeling like if I'm not creating something, if I'm not doing something, that I like get down on myself. I didn't make anything today, and so some days that's prose, hey, I produced the following number of pages, and then some days it's, if I wrote a poem, it's been a good day. I have done enough.
I just cook, and so I make
Ah,
things too, but it's not it's
no, that
it's
counts.
not it's not writing.
No, that absolutely counts. It is good for everyone that I write poetry rather than cook, because cooking is terrible. So yeah, that's just not
You
my
have to
art
write a
form.
poem now about recipes in a recipe
Yes.
format. Now I'm looking for that now.
Yes, I have heard of that people are that is a growing form where people are writing recipes that you can actually, you know, produce the thing that is in the poem, but then they write these beautiful poems around them. And I'm like, oh, that's great. Mine would be a very short poem about a charcuterie board. Like that's, nothing, no temperature was raised of anything, like cheese and crackers and veggies. So yep, I'm good.
It sounds delicious. Your poem is delicious.
That's right. And very, very straightforward. Okay, well,
Love
Doug,
it.
let's go to our ad break. When we come back, we'll talk about what you've been daydreaming about.
Okay.
So, Doug, take us away to the ad break. Thanks. Thanks, Doug. Hey, everybody. Today's ad is for ads. If you're an indie author, you know how hard it is to get the word out about your books. Well, you could advertise on this show for less than $20. Just go to notapaipublishing.com. Click on the link for the show and sign up. You can also sign up to be a guest. That's always free. And we can try to time your ad or episode to match a book launch or a cover reveal or your birthday or a marriage proposal or the anniversary of a famous battle or the predicted return of a dead celebrity or prophet or the live show announcement. We'll be at Norwescon in Seattle, April 6th to 9th. The guests are to be announced. We'd love to have you in the live audience. Bring some fun questions to ask a panel of procrastinating authors. Okay, Doug, teleport us back to the show. So, what's something you've been thinking about when you aren't writing? Totally off the wall, serious? What's something that you've been daydreaming about?
Well, I'm pretty weird, so I'll tell you that. So some of my fiction is very weird because I am personally kind of a weird I have like a lot of weird interests. So one of the things that I have been kind of obsessed about is what I call smelling time. So we have all these ways of measuring time, and it feels like we never have any time, right? All of us are trying to manage time, which is like already impossible. You can't really manage time. Time exists, time passes. You can manage yourself. But I like the idea of sensing time differently because usually it's so visual, or we say like we feel it, we feel the passage of time, or we see people grow or whatever. And I've been thinking about, well, how was timekeeping done in the past? I mean, we have watches and things like that, and they're pretty accurate. So in China and in a lot of other places, they would use actual sticks of incense or even coils of incense to keep track of time. And one of the things that I've been kind of going down a rabbit hole with is fire clocks. And so fire clocks are these dragon-shaped holders. And they could be really large too, depending, how much time you're using, keeping and everything. And they would hold incense, and on the stick, there would be a thread with bells or something heavy that would clang. And as the stick burns, it'll burn through the thread, or it burns enough so that the thread can fall. And when it does, there'll be a sound. But also there is the smell. And what I've been thinking about is that there's sound, and we're used to hearing like chimes. So there's sounds, there's visual aspects of time, you feel it in your body. But also you could keep track of the time by creating incense that is burning into different scents as there's the passage of time. So I thought about that for writing. I've also thought about it because, if you write anything, you have to do research, right? So trying to learn more about incense making and trying to make some myself. It's a little bit like cooking, but I would say that it's a little bit tricky too, because if you're making something that is going to give any sense of actual time with accuracy, you want to be able to at least try, right? Like somebody will ask, like with candles, like how long does this candle burn? So it's something like that. Yeah. And then with a stick, if you've got different things that are happening along it, then maybe at one point you'll have like pumpkin spice, and then you're like, oh no, it's 2:00 because now I smell sandalwood, or maybe like something like that. I don't know if it'll work, but I
bet it will work, but I'll bet that the things you use for the scent will change the rate at which it burns. So if if it's something that's sweeter, it's going to burn hotter. And there is a brilliant poem here. Like, yes. I mean, just the first line, the smell of time, I'm in. I'm going to read that poem, but you could do something where you talk about, you should, be yelling TM, TM, TM. This is yours. But this is so cool because you could do something about the different scents at different parts of your life as this is burning. Yep. And is it burning faster or slower with this smell and with these events going on in your life? What is the era of your life that you're in, and what does it smell like as your time is burning?
Yeah.
It's really cool.
Yeah, and I thought about that also, even, aside from the time piece of it, just thinking like, what do I do when I want to do like quiet time and I'm calming down? A lot of people burn candles, or even when they write, they'll do intention candles and they'll burn it and say like, I'll write and I'll have the smell and everything, and it'll kind of bring me to a place where I feel like I'm calm enough to like access that type of writing. And with with incense, I think of as like, well, that's kind of an interesting thing too, because you could design things that would bring, if you're doing memoir, for example, bring the memories, because smell is a very
Oh
strong
yeah.
trigger for memory. So if you're thinking like, well, I want to think about, Thanksgiving 10 years ago, like, can I find or put together something that smells like apple pie, that,
Yeah.
whatever, like, what did we put in that pie? What was that combination? That butteriness. I mean, if you could just capture it and you're
Yeah.
smelling it while you're writing, it takes you to a totally different place. So I don't know. I would maybe there's something here for like
There absolutely
fragrance
is.
based writing workshop where everyone's
Yes.
sniffing things.
Well,
I mean, it sounds really bad.
I'm
Smelling things.
yes, yes, not the stink conference,
Yeah.
but I have a confession to make that the all the tens of listeners who are listening right now will now know about me. But I am an anosmiac. I have no sense of smell, or a very limited
Okay.
sense of smell, and I recognize as I'm writing that for readers, smell is really important because it is so evocative. It creates a much richer sense of setting, but I can't describe it well because I don't know how things smell. So, as a kind of inside joke in my current series, every time I describe a smell, I use an analogy to something
Yeah.
that is not smell. It smelled like this thing sounds. It smelled like this thing looks. And it's
Mm-hmm.
this kind of running gag that only a few people in my life are like, oh, I know that the reason he's doing that is because he doesn't know what things smell like. So
Well,
even
Ben,
early on in the first book,
it,
like I'd
you could
say
say it
something,
smells like midnight,
right? Yep. And so early in the book, the character realizes that she has been, chained to this desk, and she has not been able to escape for a period of time. So she is smelling like somebody who's not taken a bath, and she says. The narrative voice says she smelled like a beginning violinist, amateur violinist sound. Because I don't know what she would smell like, but I know how amateur violinists sound, and it is
Yeah,
not
but
good.
I think it's a really interesting thing because as I was thinking about time, there is a lot of different senses that are tied together. I think it is hard when as I get, like the writers, we always think about like, okay, the senses and like how do we talk about it? And then I always think to myself, it's really strange to talk about it like I saw this or I smelled this or I felt this because well, as a person, right, we are constantly taking it all in at the same time, like,
Mhm.
compiling it all together because like it's all data that we have to use for pattern recognition to keep from dying, right? Like that's how our brains work. So it is interesting that in books, you're right, like there is fewer of this like crossover metaphor that is used, and that makes a lot of sense actually because we are always doing like this crossover
Yeah.
sensing thing that's
Yeah,
happening
I
all the
mean
time.
it's a trick for me, but you're absolutely right. Like uh, and I find I got a critique from one of my editors who was saying you're using the word like realizing or recognizing as your verb a lot because we're always taking in the stimulus, but what's relevant to the plot is when the person notices, right? And so then they recognize the smell, they identified this sound, but really it was there all along. It just isn't the plot until the person is responding, the character is responding to it. So that's something I have to watch out for. How can I make
Yeah.
it clear to the reader there is this phenomena, whatever it is, this sight, this sound. It's just that the character's unaware of it until this
Mhm.
moment, and so how
Yeah,
can that?
I love that you embrace it though, because it creates like something that's a really like, more unique reading
Oh yeah.
experience when you like see it. You're like, oh, that's a different way of describing it. I met a doctor once. I think it was a pediatrician who was probably putting my child back together again, but after an ER trip. And he said something to me or said something to my, I don't know which kid it was either, because it's like, I don't know, they both
which
could
which
be
ER trip, right?
which ER trip. Something along the lines of like, we don't feel wet. We
Yes.
feel cold and slippery.
Yep.
And so when people say they feel like there's wetness, it doesn't, I think, mean what people think it means. It
Right.
actually is a sensation of temperature and motion, I guess is the
I
way
mean,
to
I think it's
describe
temperature,
it.
motion, it's visual. Like we have
Mm-hmm.
to look and go, oh, I am wet. I am putting
Mm-hmm.
all these different stimuli together to figure out what is this
Exactly.
sensation. But yeah, if you just had one sense or another, you would not know
No,
that
it's
that is
wet.
not cold. And I've had that experience too, where grab something that's frozen, and the first thing you think is I'm being burned,
Mm-hmm.
like
Mm-hmm.
dry ice or whatever. And because your body doesn't know the difference, it's just causing damage to tissue, right? And so,
Just cooking it.
yeah, I think that's an interesting thing that we as writers can play with. This
Yeah.
person burned themselves on this ice because they really did, from as far as the physical sensation. And then the reader goes, I get that. I
Mm-hmm.
understand that feeling. But yeah, I think this idea of the smell of time. Have you ever seen what are called cording candles?
No, I don't think. Are they like
You should
braided or
look it
they
up. You
turn?
will love this. So there
Okay.
was a
I'm gonna write
time.
it down.
Yes, cording candles. So these are these candles where the candle holder has a wooden base, and then it has this metal spiral that is on it, and you put the candle inside, and you can decide how high or low you want the candle to be.
Oh, nice.
And this comes from a time when fathers, it was very sexist, very gendered. The father of the young woman who was courting would set out the candle on the front porch, and the
Oh,
young
okay.
woman and the person who was courting with her would get to talk as long as the candle was there. And if the father liked the young man, the way to communicate to them was, hey, I'm twisting this thing so you
Oh,
get lots of time.
interesting.
And if I don't like you, you get 2 turns of the screws, because that was the way to keep time. So that you could meld that into the poem. Then there was the courting candle phase.
I mean, I feel like there's a poem there too, the twist of time, twisting time.
Yes, yes. I mean, I can look back on my relationships and go, this one got 2 twists and should have gotten fewer. And this one didn't get enough twists, and this one
We've
got
just
too many.
opened up a whole new subgenre of romance.
Yes, the courting candles. But I mean, I think that's a really cool idea to play with, because you're right. We only think of time in the way we've been taught to think of time.
Yeah.
And, I saw a TikTok video by a teacher who was trying to explain to students that the Judeo-Christian calendar itself is this function of power to be able to say, we will determine for you what the year is. That Christianity and colonialism will impose time on others for whom that was not time. And so what kind of power do you have to be able to say to somebody, this is how you will conceive of time?
Well, I'll tell you something that may make our viewers a little sad, but I also think it's important information to give. I learned through working on, I was talking a little bit about this before, about the picture book from the refugee community, that a lot of refugees who are in America have a specific birthday, and it's January 1st.
Yep.
Because their calendar, from culturally or just, like calendar wise, time wise, is kept a different way. And so there's some translation lost in that timekeeping when, if for some reason they have to come here. And the way that it's handled is just by giving everyone the same birthday. And so to me, like, the loss of that time,
Right,
but also like kind of the imposition of a new time
that's
is,
exactly the word I was going to use. We have
yeah,
decided for you when this thing, which is culturally important to us, is now going to be imposed upon you.
your birthday now is this day.
Yep.
And it's great. We've given you a very special day, but now this is technically how we measure a lot of things that are tied to the passage of time in your life is going to be, this number, and it's the same number we give everybody.
Yep.
Because it's
And
too hard
the
to calculate.
dehumanization there of saying, and everyone else in your community is going to have the same number.
Mm-hmm.
Like, what does that say to a group of people? This is a thing that is really important and distinct for all the people in our community, except for your whole group. You get January 1st. That is, there's a lot that you could do with that, the January 1st community. How many people? I had a friend in college who was from Kenya, and he was Maasai, and in his culture, that he had no idea how old he was exactly, because that was not important, and then to have to fill out every form and say, this is how old I am, knowing this is not true. This is this estimate.
Yeah, and it's not like, everybody has to have like a birthday party or birthday this or birthday that. It's just more that it's such a big part of identity
Right.
in our culture and society
In our
that
culture.
you're
Right.
asked about it because you have to fill out forms. You're asked about it for pretty much everything, like what is your birth date? And you have to put it down. So it's interesting that time is very, like you said, like the importance of time, but whose time, right?
Yeah. Who gets to decide? Yeah.
Hmm.
So that's you could do a lot with that. You could write a whole book of poetry about the smell of time.
I like how this is like writers not writing, and
I
you're
have
just like keep
decided,
writing.
yes, when we are done procrastinating, here is your assignment. Write an entire book of poetry about the smell of time.
Okay.
Uh, so what's coming up for you in terms of where folks can learn about your work right now? I don't, not what have you been, no process. If somebody is saying, I want to find out about your work now, where can they find your stuff? Or
Yeah.
announcements? What's going on with you?
Okay, so I think for right now, let's see, I've got two. So one is with Not a Pipe. So there is a story here, and this is such a
Oh, good.
it is I would say that when I was trying to understand what you were describing to me, Ben, that I felt like my mind had gone into several loops that were like spiraling on itself. So I'm not sure that I can describe it as
Yes,
well as
we
you
should tell
can.
everybody what this is about. So
Yes.
the idea here is, and this is something that I talk about with my students, I firmly believe that we are hardwired as human beings for story, for evolutionary reasons. We use story to communicate ideas to our children. And we see stories even when there is no story there because it is so evolutionarily hardwired. So I had this idea of doing an experiment to see if this would work. I asked authors if they would create a short story where at about the 2/3 to 3/4 mark through the story, some character turns to another and says, oh, this reminds me of the time where, or whatever. And they tell a story to the other character. And then the other character responds, oh, this is now changing my behavior at the end of the story in some way. Only the challenge is the author herself does not know the story inside her own. And then I took all these stories and I nested them. So if you're reading the first story, a character tells a story, and then within that, somebody else tells a story. Yeah, it's this big, deep kind of V, and then you have all the endings. And so even though it's a short story anthology, you read it like a novel, and you're reading a story within a story within a story within a story, and then they all resolve. And what you'll find, even though they are totally different genres, this person is in the midst of a heist story and turns to somebody and tells them a science fiction story, and that person then tells a horror story, and that person tells a fantasy story that is set in a completely different world. They still all work. And so as we come out, the character says, oh, that, and there was some finagling of putting them in an order.
I don't even know what algorithm you had in your to do this, because I was just like, I don't, again, like, so he told us that, and I was like, what?
Yeah.
I was like, what are you doing?
But it works. And I know I was asking a lot of the authors, because so often when we're writing a story, we're saying, okay, I'm going to write this story. There was this prompt given, or maybe, I'm writing it because I came up with it off the top of my head, and I'm going to submit it to the Buckman Journal or whatever. And then if they reject it, I still own this thing and I can sell it to somebody else. I can still get it out in the world. And what I was asking these authors to do was write a story where it wouldn't work for anything else. Like, here's this story where in the middle, something happens that you don't know about. And so this was a big ask for these authors. And I really felt badly for the folks I had to reject, because I was like, you have wasted your time. But the folks who got included, it's really cool the way it came out.
Yeah, it is really fun. So I have a story in here, and I would say that it's calligraphy horror. I write a lot of horror. And it's called Mama Only Visits When It's Dark. And what I really enjoyed about reading the stories, and in particular how this was put together, is it kind of reminded me of the fact that like you said, storytelling is very different depending on how you've been raised, or maybe like your culture, or just how stories are presented. And sometimes, there's a story that has, beginning, middle, and end, but the middle takes you on this journey to all these other stories. Like, I can't tell you about what happened at the end of this thing that I started, because I got to tell you what Aunt Sarah told me, like, about 3 months ago what happened to her. And then we gotta talk about grandma, what happened when grandma got married to her first husband, who was a total, like, whatever. You go through all these other things, you come back to the end, but you couldn't have gotten there unless you told the rest of the other stuff. And so it reminded me of that, and I really enjoyed it. It was definitely, though, impressive to see how, because at least that's in a family and kind of how the story goes together. This is just like, here, take them all.
Yeah,
put them together.
It was wild having to try and figure out what is the best order so that it still works as a single sequential story was really tricky, because I was comfortable with it jumping genres, but I did want, especially on that kind of back end, for folks to feel like, oh, that one did resolve. That one did resolve. That makes sense that this affected that resolution. So really that was the deciding for me was, would it make sense that your story would come before this other person's, which meant it came before, so that it then feels like, oh, it's natural that yours not only resolved, but helped the next story resolve.
Yeah.
And so it was tricky, but yeah, folks should check that one out. I think it is an experiment, and I think a success. So that was, and that was the other thing, was saying to the authors, this may not work. Like, maybe we'll all work on this and it'll be a disaster and we won't publish it. And it works. So check that one out.
I'm a big structure nerd, so I appreciated the kind of experimental aspect of it, but I was also like, I don't know what's going to happen.
Yeah.
So
Yep. I didn't either going in. That was our most experimental, because most of the time we'll pick a theme, like where we'll say, okay, this is
but
about,
then why? That's so boring. Let's not do that anymore.
Well, I think they're valuable for different reasons. We did one where it was only women authors. We did one where it was specifically about, the rise of fascism and, kind of warning of that. We've got one coming out this summer that's exclusively genre fiction by LGBTQIA plus authors, who often are underrepresented in the various genres. So, there are, phenomenal LGBTQIA plus authors working in every field, but in sci-fi, fantasy, horror, they're having a hard time breaking through. And we were like, we can create a space where we can get some of these voices. And so I'm very intentionally not on the editorial team of that one. It would be inappropriate for me to be like, and this cishet white guy has decided that your story gets in. So I'm not doing any of that work, but we've got this excellent team that's putting those together. And so I'm just as excited as everyone else to see how will that come together. But I have gotten to preview some of the stories, and they're really good. So that'll be a fun one this summer. But yeah, that Stories Within was one where I was going, and we might not have an anthology this summer because it just might not work.
Well, that's definitely one people should check out, especially the structure nerds, because I think it's a lot of fun to kind of see how all the pieces work together. And yeah, I like it a lot. I think I have like 4 copies, and I still have, like, I'm like, they're mine.
Yeah,
they're mine. But I have given some away.
Tell everybody about Asian Ghost Stories, which is behind you. The cover for that one came out, so it's really cool. I love that's a cool book, and I have gotten to read a couple of stories in there too. It's a really good.
So this one is this is by Flame Tree, and what they have in here, which is what I really love about this book, is that because horror stories and ghost stories in particular are such a huge part of, I think, Asian heritage, Asian belief systems and culture, it did strike me as a little bit unusual that for such a long time there weren't a lot of, there's a lot of horror stories and movies and stuff, South Korea and also in China and in Japan and all that, like Ring and all that, but I felt like it wasn't quite yet here for a long time in the US. And so one of the things I really like,
that the film broke through before the literary.
Yeah. And so what I really like about this book is that it has new authors. And so I have a story in here that is about a Chinese version of the Ouija board that you make instead of buy. You create one, and what happens when it's used. But a lot of the stories in here are translations of ancient stories. And so these are folk tales. These are the things that I grew up with. These are the things that, like I say, I'm not superstitious, but I like to make sure I appease my relatives so they don't come over and haunt me. So there's a lot of that in here. You think about like fox spirits, you think about the resentful ghosts, the Ring character, that's based off of an actual supposedly real story, and about a samurai's servant. And so there's a lot in here where it really brings you to the original. And I like that because I don't think I've seen something that does that combination of translations plus some, updated stories.
Yeah, that's cool.
And this one I like a lot. I also have an essay. So this is fiction and this is the nonfiction one because I do write horror. And Angela and Lee are Stoker winners, they're editors of this. And so this came out on Valentine's Day this year, and they're essays from women horror writers. And what we talk about in here, we explore kind of like we call it mises. So they're kind of messy memoir-y essays about our experiences as women in our culture, whatever those experiences are, because diaspora is huge, right? Just because there's overlap doesn't mean like all of us are the same.
Variety.
Yeah. And so we write about our lives, but we also write it in the context of how we would, incorporate these horror elements because we are so much steeped in it because we write about it. And I wanted to contribute to it because I like to write oftentimes about the immigrant experience. I grew up in the 80s and the 90s. And so I like to write about that experience and incorporate it into a lot of my writing, particularly the horror stories. And this one I talked about that experience, but then contextualized it with this really well-known Chinese folktale called Huapi, which is about the painted skin. And it's about this demoness who basically wears human skin and pretends to be a woman so that way she can blend into society and be married or married into as a younger wife into a family. But it's an interesting story to me because a lot of times Asian horror stories don't empower the women. The women are problematic. They are temptresses, or they are spirits to be dispelled, or they're just annoying ghosts or foxes or something. But this one, there were two strong women characters on opposite sides. And the husband was kind of useless. So I like that. I like being able to draw connections between those fictional women and the women in my life. So so I think
and also that idea of wearing skin is such a great metaphor for putting on gender, for for demonstrating what womanness is this cultural thing. I need to wear the part, right? And that's a powerful metaphor to play with.
She would have, this character, this demoness would have to repaint the skin to keep it so that she could assimilate essentially into this society and into this household. And once they discovered that she wasn't actually what they saw on the outside, they immediately rejected her. So it's definitely a really interesting metaphor to compare it with immigration and assimilation.
But I'm also thinking, as all these anti-drag bills are being passed all over the country, I've been thinking about what else is, potentially precluded by them that we don't want to acknowledge is drag. If drag is a presentation of gender to show kind of the ridiculousness, the fact that gender is a cultural construction, then I think if we were really being honest, we have to acknowledge like WWE wrestling is absolutely a drag show.
I love wrestling.
It's somebody saying, I'm going to paint myself in toxic masculinity,
absolutely.
And tights and makeup,
it's entertainment, I guess. And it's a fictional, like, character persona that's created, and it's storytelling, right? And some of the stories are, I watched a lot of wrestling when I was little, like Hulk Hogan, like Dusty Rhodes,
Albano with the rubber band on his cheek.
And the one thing I really loved about the creation of these characters is that it was one of the few places that was really, really clear to people outside of a culture and a language. My grandmother loved it because she didn't need to speak English. You don't need it. You understand everything that's going on just by watching the interactions and it's communication.
Body language. Clearly, I don't like you. You don't like me. We're now going to everything was I had not thought of that. It's beyond language.
It's beyond it. It's communication that transcends cultural and language barriers. And I think, if someone wants to create that type of communication, it's really powerful
Oh yeah,
because it reaches beyond just, you don't have to say much, but you can
right.
show a lot more and communicate a lot to
Yeah.
a lot of people who may not have access to language or any of that.
But
So
I think it's
yeah.
also a great mechanism, even with the language removed, to explore what is it that gender means.
Mhm.
Why is it that this guy is being manly when he's wearing tights and clearly wearing makeup, which are things we generally associate with femininity, but he's being masculine because he does what? And even without being able to hear the words coming out of his mouth, okay, the way he is posturing, the way he is threatening, all these things that we have been taught to associate with masculinity are on display. And it's a good chance for us to step back and go, what does that say about masculinity? Like if that is maleness, it turns out it's not the clothes, and it turns out it's not wearing makeup, it's getting in somebody else's face and, like being menacing, then this is drag. This is a way to explore gender. And my fiance and I were talking this morning about how these folks who want to ban drag will never ban WWE. They'll never ban football.
No.
Really, banning drag is really the intersection of attacking the LGBTQ community and attacking women. And they're saying to be like a woman is bad, right? To be demonstrating masculinity is acceptable. And I think there's something worth reflecting on in all the places that are saying let's ban drag are really saying let's only ban drag if a person dresses up as a woman. Like it's really gendered.
Yeah, I think it's a great idea. I mean, I feel like we've just been generating all these like anthology ideas and poetry
Yes,
ideas.
right?
I think it would be a great idea to take like, modern, like current social issues, social justice issues, but also just current issues, right? These complex issues, and then put them into the context of some of these stories that come from whatever culture,
Right.
ancient stories, because a lot of these things of acceptance, of like otherness, of like wanting to belong, those things are through lines through all the stories and every story really. And so if you can kind of meld them together, it's a really interesting. I
There's
don't know, it's not necessarily as like tricky as this, but I don't know.
No, I think it could be fantastic. I think there's your
Yeah.
next novel is instead
No.
of the short story that's just about one painted demoness, what if you had a group of demons who are in different elements of society painting
Mhm.
themselves and trying to masquerade, and what is the cultural context by which they're trying, and are they communicating with each other about, hey, you go try and paint yourself in this way, and you go try and portray this, and how do they all then get caught, not get caught, get dismissed because they cease to be sufficiently whatever. So
Yep.
I think that would be a really cool, and then you get to write about demonesses too, which is cool.
Yeah.
But yeah, you've got
Yeah,
you've got at least a whole book there, maybe a series.
my favorite part is that, well, it is in this story that I was told, the painted skin, is that in the versions that I read, the demoness, when she wears the painted skin and she goes into the household, it's like, oh, there's a demon in your house, like, oh, it's doing awful things. She does housework, she cooks,
Yeah.
she cleans, she folds the lawn, she talks to the guy, she keeps him happy, she like is doing all these like really like nurturing things, and you're like, oh, she's evil, she's stealing your energy. And she does all these nice things for him, and then he gets, he kicks her out once he realizes that she's a demoness, and then she gets really mad, so she rips out his heart. I'm like, yes.
Yeah, she was doing everything. Well,
She was taking care of you.
there's a great whole a plot for your book
Yes.
there too, is what are the way that we have still not created gender parity in these heterosexual relationships around work, that women are expected to work out of the home 60 hours a week and do all the household work, and like this painted demon comes into the home and says, I'm doing everything. And then he goes, yeah, and I've decided you're a demon, you're out. And she's like, yeah, I'm ripping your heart
Yeah.
out. That's awesome.
Yeah.
So we do on this show, we do a weekly poll, and I need
Okay.
to pull up the results from this last week. So last week we asked folks which they preferred, winter or summer, and we
Oh.
only gave them those two options. So if you
Okay.
had to choose winter or summer, and where would you stand on that one?
Winter or summer? Oh, I mean, I want to say it depends on the point for poetry, I would say winter is better, but for probably going outside, I mean, reading poetry, winter is better. Writing poetry, summer is better. So how about that?
Yes, yes. I have a very, very strong preference because I am basically allergic to the sun. Like if I step out
Okay.
into the sun, I will fry. And
Are you
so
a
for me,
vampire?
yeah, like you know,
Are you supernatural?
my ancestors lived so far to the north in Scotland that they were like,
I
son, we don't have to deal with that
I
problem.
feel like the Mr. Potato Head costume plus the cabbage that I'm wearing is
It's
just a ruse. Like that's like we're trying to blend in, and what you really are is
a
telling me
vampire
that
in a Mr. Potato Head costume. If somebody can, if
yeah.
you're listening and you envision a vampire in a Mr. Potato Head costume, that's me, absolutely. Well, this is interesting. So I am strongly, excuse me, I'm strongly on the winter side of this. But folks who wrote in and took the poll on Twitter, predominantly summer. Summer was
Yeah.
the 64% one. The if people had to decide, we're creating the false binary there.
Mm-hmm. Well, at
So
least you didn't make them vote on something like, super serious, like, choose between bacon and ham, or I don't know,
yeah,
something
yeah,
like
that's
that would just cause like, it'd be like that scene from Ghostbusters where it's like, like
the
cats and
absolute
dogs be like
yes,
liking each other. No.
the absolute chaos that ensues.
Yeah.
So what should be our next poll? Our poll
Okay.
this week for your show.
Well, let's see. So, I always believe that the way to handle people who might be your like nemesis is to kind of know what their strengths are, right? I mean, because I don't know, I don't think I'm gonna have to have a like, fight for to save the world. But if I had to, I would say that we should have a poll to see what power we would give to an arch enemy or like a villain that we had to fight, because then you at least have some option, right,
Right?
to control
Which,
for that.
yeah. So
Hmm.
what would be your two options?
Okay, so these are superpowers that I would like to, so I'm kind of
Yeah.
being nice to this enemy
Yeah, they're
person.
legit
They're
superpowers.
legit superpowers. So one is the ability to change density. So you could make like things float or sink or pick up something and make it really, really like heavy. So I would say that. So object density change would be one. And then the other one is the ability to talk to animals, because yeah,
Yeah.
have we
Yeah.
have we
And so
not?
both of those are powers you would want, but the question is, which
Hmm.
would you give to your arch enemy? I like that.
Yes.
That's a
Which one
more
would you give?
interesting question, which
You have to give away something that you want, but you also have to think about, and you
yeah,
don't
how you're gonna
necessarily
defeat
get the
this
one
person.
that's left over. It's just what would you give to
Right.
the person?
Yeah, but you have to give one of these to your arch enemy who you're going to battle. So which one do you want? That will be a fun one. So if folks are interested in weighing in, we'll toss that up and you can weigh in this week. Next up, your to read pile. What
Okay.
are you looking forward to that will also take you away from your writing?
Hmm. I have a lot, but I'm going to say this one because it's one of the newer ones, at least in my pile. I hadn't read. I know it's been around for a while. So my friend Susan Wang and Julian Chaya. Julian is 13, so I take his
Yep.
recommendations very seriously because to get like kind of an above steady level of reaction from a 13-year-old
Yeah.
boy
Yep.
is like, okay, I better check this out. So he recommended Scythe by Neal Schusterman, and I think it's really like apropos for our times.
Mhm.
My understanding is that the story is about a society where sort of dystopian, but not really, like an AI has basically taken care of all of our ailments. So people live forever. We're all happy, no disease, no death. Everyone is just alive. But then there's a problem because you can't have that many people alive. So you have reapers who go through and basically keep the population in check. And so I'm really interested in seeing how this AI plays out in this society and how that works out, because maybe I should take notes.
Right, right. Well, this is one that I have had my eye on too, and I was thinking, do I actually have that in my shelves? And I realized it's in my classroom because you're right, my students love it, and it's been recommended to me by students. So that's one that I will have to check out as well. This one I picked up at Norwescon last year. It's called The Ultra Thin Man by Patrick Swenson, and it's a future noir. And so I'm curious to see how that works. And I got it at Norwescon last year, and I'm going again this year. And who knows, maybe Mr. Swenson will be right next to me, and I would like to be able to say I read your book.
How do you dress for future noir? Like, what do you like? How do you dress for that? I mean, could you do the same costume? Well, I don't know.
I've read some future noir. You know, you've got your Blade Runner kind of a feel, and then I read one that was murder mystery, but it was noir, and that was really fun. So I think I'll enjoy it. But even looking at the cover art, which is beautiful, I'm not sure I'm quite catching it. So that folks can read it, or if there's too much reflection.
I can kind of see there's a little bit of reflection, but I can see.
How do I get off of that?
Yes, that'd be good. Don't give us seizures.
Yeah, I know, but it doesn't look like, you know, Blade Runner-esque. It looks like this really different feel, this single character on this kind of barren field, but everything looks, rather than being made of stone, like it's almost like technological. You know, nature itself has become. So who knows? I don't know enough about it, but it's on my to read piles. And
Neal, well, once I finish mine and you finish yours, maybe we'll just have to do a book swap or something.
We'll swap. And we'll link to both those in the show notes, so folks can check those out as well. Great. So where can folks find you online?
Online. After we just we're thinking about like AI.
Yes, exactly.
Like, where can you find me? Where can they all find me? I'm on a few things. I'm on Instagram as paippolito, so PAIPPOLITO. I kind of post about all sorts of random things. I would say it's board gaming, the running, the cooking, and then books and poetry. So you'll get a range, and hopefully that satisfies a few different appetites.
You will find something you like there.
Yes. I'm on Facebook still because I'm on Facebook still, but you know, I'm still on Facebook. Then I'm Frances Pai there. And I have a website, which I should update more often, but it's www.francesippolito.com. I was on Twitter, but I have to be really honest that I am kind of bad about Twitter nowadays. I do try to post, but you know, I'm still waiting for everything to settle. I'm just still waiting for it to like legit. Just find its place, and then we'll see.
No, you know, don't say you're not good at Twitter. Say it was a strong political stance. You're not, you know, and that's why you're not tweeting anymore. I think that's totally legitimate.
I'm just seeing how it all, like, you know, the Jello, we just wiggling a lot right now.
Yes, that's a good way to describe Twitter. It is wiggling Jello.
It's wiggling Jello.
Yes. Well, before we get to our send-off, I need to thank some folks. Thanks to the artist Max Oakland, who reached out and provided one of his songs for our intro, I Prefer the Dusk. Let Max know you like it by following him on Twitter at Max Oakland. And thanks to Halizna CCO for their song Kids for the ad break. If you're in a band and you'd like your song used on the show, I would love to highlight a listener's work like Max's song, so email that to me. Thanks, as always, to Doug, the producer, for making the show sound good and taking the blame when it doesn't. I appreciate that, Doug. And I cannot forget to mention, Writers Not Writing is a production of Not a Pipe Publishing, so please go to notapaipublishing.com and check out the amazing works of writers who didn't procrastinate too much. If you like this show, rate it and review it wherever you found it, and please check out Frances's stories in the anthologies Chromophobia and Gothic Asian Ghost Stories. Rate and review those too. Even a very short review and a single click on that 5th star makes a huge difference to authors. So if you have 3 minutes, make Frances's day. I am too old to yell, smash that like button, but if you could gently tap the like button for this show, I would greatly appreciate it. And so that brings us to our sign off. So Frances, what would you like? We got 3 things that Frances and I would like you all to remember this week. So Frances, give them their first one.
Okay. I like food, so I'll say this one. Live your life like a dumpling. Don't overfill it or you'll burst open, and don't overseason or you'll lose sight of your focus. We should always strive to be a well-balanced bowl.
I like that. Second, in life, as in writing, it's the spaces between the words that make it all meaningful. So don't ignore the spaces. And third, no matter how much you procrastinate, we're still proud of you.
Oh.
If I take my time, I'm